And when it's steady,
Oh, it's blinking. There.
there it is. Now we're recording.
Okay.
We're Dave and Liz Gibbons, and we've probably come the farthest. No. We used to live in Michigan, and so Minneapolis isn't that far away. We come to the conference here. But we've just retired to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The very week we moved into our new place, U.S. News & World Report announced that Lancaster County was the #1 destination spot for retirement. How do you like that?
So we picked well.
And then people said, well, what brought you to Lancaster? And I said, my mother. I was born in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, raised on a farm, and or at least started on a farm in the country, and my dad turned the little country place into a farm too. So we had a great life there. I left there to go to Bible college, and 54 years later I came back, but it was never in my rearview mirror to go back home. When I told my brother, a missionary in Alaska, that it was like the salmon going to his home stream, he says, you know what happens to the salmon? You obviously know. But we didn't go there to die, we went there to live. Our life took a little change 5 years ago as we cashed in our chips of retirement from Send International, a mission that thought ahead about retirement needs for missionaries. And now we're living on social welfare. And no more office hours, but we can keep on doing the things that we've enjoyed doing most. And among that was teaching English in China for the last 15 years. And maybe some of that will come out in the course of our talking. One of the things we've been doing is taking teams of 20 or more each summer to teach an English intensive course for 3 weeks at a big university in Beijing. So we're coming to you as practitioners, as team leaders, as well as people who have gone through some training and watched and learned from other people's experiences. And you know that great saying, if you're willing to accept it secondhand, the tuition is less. So hopefully out of our time together, we will reduce some risk on your part in taking teams, short-term teams, on trips, and give you some tools to be thinking about in those times of preparation.
So as we start, we'd just like to, a couple of you tell us why you're here. Why did you pick this seminar? Not that we want the pat on the back, but what are you looking for?
I'm sure you didn't come because you knew us, except a few people I see here too.
Yeah.
I'm an international worker, and we have a lot of short-term teams that come to join us, and so I'm interested in helping them walk through how to think about risk for their teams.
Good. Okay, yes.
From our church, my husband and I have led several short-term mission groups, and we're just looking for ways of how can we better prepare our teams before they go.
Good.
Okay,
You're in the right
and
place.
One
Thanks.
more?
I work for a mission organization called YWAM.
We've heard about them.
Yeah, we met some YWAMers in the Philippines years ago, and said, well, we're really long-term. We're here for 2 years.
So we have both sides represented. We have the receiving side and the church side and the senders. So as we start thinking today, we want you to find a few other people, 3 or 4 people, and just brainstorm a little bit. What can go wrong? And we're going to give you...
Pull yourselves together in groups of 3 or 4.
Well, let me give instructions first. We're going to give you a piece of paper, and we'd like you to write a couple things on that piece of paper. And when you've got a couple things written on the piece of paper, grab a piece of masking tape and tape it to the back wall there. So, form groups.
Do you need this board to write on?
Yes, I will. Eventually.
Okay, well...
Do you want to give papers out, David? There, give papers out on that side. There you go.
I'm a terrible writer.
But what's the
All right. Take about 3 minutes. Yeah, approach it flat. Yeah. This will be where we put, just kind of after they get a chance to look at. I'm gonna walk around and read other ones.
Let's not go there yet.
No.
No, honey, I'll walk around when they've finished. And the next instruction is to post your list on the wall. Just join a small group. We're answering the question on the screen.
Want to get some from the dining room?
One is with non-government organizations. So they're all trade. This one is
When you have 3 or 4, feel free to grab tape and post it.
For some people, that medications or whatever, but along with their status of they would never change clothes.
yes, they're all
I spent 2 summers in Columbus. One day came out of the house and better staying. Nobody right there. Right on the open exchange. So, you know, there's those questions of words.
All right, please take your list, post it on the back. Here's the tape. Then read each other's lists.
Go up to read other lists?
Go up and, yeah, just post all the lists on the back, get up and go back and read other people's lists.
Now, if we go there,
We were just getting started.
I know. Here, grab one there, and I'll take one for here.
Did I read that right? Rockford, Massachusetts.
Yes, my brother passed.
John, here's a piece of tape.
Norfolk, Massachusetts.
Okay, go back and read the other people's lists.
Gloucester.
Please.
Celebrated New Year's one time with him.
Yes.
Did you know of the Oasis Training Center?
What?
Oasis Training Center, did you ever hear that?
No.
That's another English school in China.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know there are many, yeah. We were just part of the faculty of a large university, so we weren't running our own school. Okay, let's gather. With your small group, choose one of the problems you saw, either your own or someone else's, and decide how you'd fix it. So with your small group, choose one problem and decide how you'd fix it.
So which problem we want to hear from? Well,
some of it is preparation of good discovery process. I know what to be able to address.
I mean, I don't say conservative, but
Place with adequate preparation.
Okay, can we have your attention, please? Group in the back, what was your problem?
That you picked.
Disrupts your ministry.
Okay, disrupts ministry.
Spoken by on-field missionaries, correct? Yes, and churches need to recognize that you think you're going there with a great gift to these wonderful people who need you. And they're seeing, oh no, it's going to take
Another
3 months
short-term
to get
team's
ready.
coming.
Yes.
How do you fix it?
We talked about a couple of different things, significant orientation before and after arrival, having them be aware of culture and things like that could impact, being aware of how what they do with social media might impact. And we've also had them read books like When Helping Hurts or different things like that ahead of time before coming out. And
to pace yourself. Don't have
pacing.
10 groups in one year, but may have only a couple of groups.
Okay. Okay, good. Now, for the sake of time, we're not going to solve all the problems, but let's just hear what they are. What was your problem you picked?
Yeah. Disunity.
Disunity.
Disunity of the short-term team that's going. Real quick, any solutions?
We didn't get that.
Okay,
We didn't get that far.
we're going to talk about that.
We will.
Okay, this group here.
We just said medical or health issues.
Okay.
Health.
We had an older woman who didn't tell us that she was a severe diabetic. She did tell us that she was diabetic, but she had it under control, but it got so bad that it affected her eyesight, and she was afraid to let us know in the 2 months between her acceptance and our trip. And it was so bad that she was constantly watching every step on the sidewalk, uneven sidewalks, and she walked right into an overhang, knocked her down on the ground.
Broke her arm.
Broke her arm.
Other things.
Didn't tell us she had broken her arm. Actually, that happened later in the bathtub when she couldn't help herself up, and then it broke. And she stayed in bed and didn't even tell her roommate. And finally, the next morning, her roommate realized, you need help, and they were scheduled to fly out the next day. We actually got medical help instantly, and with the help of the airlines, got them on a plane that day and got them home to help immediately.
Group back here.
We talked about team conflict,
Okay?
but we didn't get into that detail too much.
Wherever two or more are gathered in my name, according to messiology, there'll be a fight. Okay.
Group here?
We kind of goes along with this unity, not a team player.
Okay, not a team player?
Not a team player.
And what
Yeah.
we've talked about, what we've done is, we have several months of meetings and training to start building the team. And then we also have a covenant that we, every member agrees.
You're reading our script today.
Oh.
Good. This is great. See, this is why we're having you do the seminar.
Yeah, so every member signs
Yeah.
it because they agree to it. And then when we get to the host country, we give it to our translators too.
Okay, good.
Wow.
Group behind you.
Yeah.
Pretty much ditto what you guys.
Ditto,
Okay, and how about the group in the back? Anything new?
Nothing, relational conflict and medical issues that erupted, that were already existing but then erupted.
Erupted, yeah. Okay.
Okay, good. Good feedback. Good. You're on track here, obviously on target for this session. And this idea that tying it into this conference theme of risk and rest. We genuinely believe that good preparation can reduce the amount of risk. There's going to be risk, let's face it. Just taking people out of their own context and their own at-home feeling into an environment that's new and different is a risk. And hopefully that it will be a good risk that teaches younger people, even older people for that matter, that this is something God may have them do for the rest of their lives. And it's a great way of recruiting people into long-term missions.
We have a handout that we'll give you at the end that's kind of a summary, so you don't have to take a lot of notes. It also includes a team covenant, just a sample of a team covenant, so we thought we'd just track through and then give you the handout.
Give you that at the end rather than looking and reading our paper while we're trying to tell you what's on it.
So what are some basics for any team you're going to take?
First of all, a thorough application process. We go through this with our teams each year to China. We did get to a point with those who were returning year after year. We had a lot of returnees that we developed a more condensed one for alumni. But take that into mind. You don't know. I mean, there are
Even
things,
if you're all from the same church.
you think you know people, but you won't know them until you're on a team together.
The second one is a release of liability that has to be notarized. That is like a blanket statement. It's a boilerplate statement that gives their liability to whoever, either the church or the mission organization that is in charge, that they understand if something goes wrong, they can't sue.
Yeah, that they can't sue you, the organization, or the agency you're going through if something happens. If there was a terrorist eruption that destroyed them, they can't go after the church or after the mission for reimbursement.
Now, we think, well, they're all good Christians. They wouldn't possibly do that, but their family might.
Yes. A personal testimony and a signed doctrinal statement. We actually have a questionnaire with about 10 issues that pop up sometimes in doctrinal statements with multiple choice answers. It's where people respond to, and it's very interesting how when we kind of think everybody thinks the same way in this church, and you find out there's a little variations. It's not that it disqualifies them, but to know that there are differences of viewpoints on certain issues and doctrinal issues. But the personal testimony, having someone just write out their own spiritual walk experience, their journey to Christ, is a great help in knowing where that person's coming from.
It also helps you understand how they perceive coming to Christ. Do they think they are going to go and make 5 converts in 1 week? Maybe that's the way they came to the Lord really fast, but they need to understand that a short-term team is not there just to save souls. A short-term team is there to augment whatever is going on in the long term.
One question we ask is, how would you explain the gospel to someone you'd meet? And we had a young man write and he says, I'm really not comfortable sharing the gospel with people. And we said, good, because you won't get a chance to do that in China. You may never have an opportunity, but you will learn how to in the process.
And guess what he's doing? He's now in his 3rd year teaching in China.
With the LIC.
And he's learned how to share his faith in a context there. Background check. This again is often a legal document that if you are coming from a church, your people may already have a background check to work in child protection situations. But this is just another piece that's good to have for your team.
It's a $10 fee in our application process. It costs a little bit to have it done, but it's an expected norm now for standards of excellence, which we'll tell you about in a moment.
Child protection code of conduct. Maybe you aren't going to be working with children, but it's good to know that your people are safe with children and with the children of the families you're going to work with.
Medical information release, we already implied that somewhat. And we had what we thought was good information, but she hid some things from us and didn't tell us.
So the team leader should know exactly what medications the person is taking. Now, actually, we take those medical forms sealed and don't open them unless there's a problem.
So our agency manages...
Because of HIPAA.
Yeah, our agency manages the application process, puts all the medical forms information in sealed envelopes with each person's name, and then at the end of the trip, we hand it back to them unopened so they know that we weren't exploring their medical history.
Now, we know if a person's a diabetic, we know if they're gluten intolerant, if they're dairy intolerant, we know those things. But as far as, their personal medical history, that's their business until we need to know.
Yeah.
References. Even within a church team, it's good to hear what other people say. And we ask for a reference from an employer, a reference from a coworker, and a reference from somebody else who has worked with them. None of them can be family.
When we looked at those references, sometimes we get a little careless. And I had one from a pastor who at the bottom of this very glowing reference form wrote, "If you have any questions, call me." Well, what would you think? I don't see any problem here.
Until we got her there.
Until we got her there and had a problem. And then I called the pastor and he said, "Well, we did have that problem with her and we just thought this trip would help her get over it." Whoa, folks. Short-term mission trips are not designed to save your team or
help
a person improve their teaching skills or their ability to get along with other people. Now, all those things may happen, but that's adding a burden on the team leaders as well as on the people they're going to.
And then finally, a valid passport and visa. The valid passport is obvious, but the visa varies with where you're going. And so somebody needs to understand, what is the visa process? How do you get them? And is it possible to get the whole team visas? Can one person take the passports and get all the team visas? Do they have to get their own? But that's got to be decided well ahead of time. Yes?
The passport has to be good for 6 months.
6 months after,
Right.
yes.
They won't let them out of the U.S.
Right.
Right.
I've seen that happen.
Yeah, so all that has to be in your initial, this is why
Understand what the
this
rules
lady
and
said you're meeting multiple times before.
Right.
You need to start 6 months ahead of a team.
We'd like to introduce you to the organization called Standards of Excellence. This organization actually was largely developed out of our short-term training program, working in conjunction with Culture Link in Atlanta, Georgia. In fact, one of our favorite missionary friends, Terry Hughes, now married to Gary Vincelette, was pretty much the author of our whole training system on short-term missions. So we want to play this for you. Nope,
Oops.
that won't work.
Go back, all right.
This is our Canadian director.
As we film this video, it's June 2015, and there are churches and individuals across Canada and around the world preparing for summer short-term missions. Many of you are participating in short-term missions work, so we've been thinking a lot about this. SEND believes in short-term missions and that it's important we do it very well. For 10 years now, SEND has been an accredited member of the Standards of Excellence for Short-Term Missions. This association has identified best practices to help churches and teams and individuals ensure that their short-term missions are based on healthy, God-honoring principles. Today I'd like to share with you 3 of those 7 standards for you to think about. The first is readiness or training. It's vitally important that short-term missionaries learn about the context they're going to serve in. This might sound like common sense, but I've been personally shocked sometimes to learn how little those goers know about the people they will serve among. For example, who's leading the country? Who is their president or prime minister or king or queen? What's the economic situation like in that region? What assets does that country have, and what do they export to the world? What religious view is dominant in that area? How do they think about God and about spiritual things? And finally, are we learning at least a few phrases of the local language? By learning to say please and thank you and introduce ourselves even with a few simple phrases, we communicate care and respect for their culture and values. Let's not be afraid to ask our short-term workers, even our youth, to step up to a responsible standard of readiness for cross-cultural service. The second standard is God-centeredness. The primary motivation for any short-term mission trip has to be God-centered. Sometimes our focus shifts a bit to the goer, and we say it's important that they see the world, or learn about a new culture, or even help our youth appreciate how good they have it at home. All of these miss the mark. Is God at the center of our purpose? Sometimes it's helpful to remember that God is there before we arrive. He's already at work. By being humble and prayerful servants, He can use us to accomplish beautiful things, even in a short period of time. I'll say it as plainly as I can. If our primary motivation is not to bring glory to God, then perhaps we should stay home. The third standard is intentional follow-through. Any excellent short-term mission trip does not end when we reboard the plane for the flight home, or at the final team party where we share our pictures. What happens in the year following the short-term mission trip? If appropriate, are you keeping in touch with the people you've met? Especially the mission workers will appreciate and be encouraged by your ongoing interest in their work. Are you praying for that work, that it will advance after you've left? Are you considering how you can support the work, perhaps financially, so that it can really move forward in the years ahead? And finally, are we continuing to apply some of the lessons we've learned by being on a short-term mission team? Are we prioritizing unity with other believers? And continuing in evangelism and discipleship? Are these things true in our lives when we return home because we have served the Lord in this way? At Send Canada, frankly, the goal is not just an excellent trip in some faraway ministry place, but rather to help make disciples in that place, while discipling Christ followers who will take those experiences and integrate it into their lives to be globally minded and faithfully serving right here at home. There's a lot more.
So what makes a good team? Well, we'd like to just give you a couple of principles.
A team commits to a common objective. Can you imagine a football team without goalposts? Can you imagine even wrestling without rules? I sort of think that's what cage wrestling is. Just kill the other guy. Yeah, a team has to have a common objective. Clearly stated, clearly purpose, and should be written not from your church that's sending the team's perspective as much as from the receiving end and how you will best fit into their program that's already going on.
An accepted leader gives significant time to team building. One of the things that came up in almost every group was conflict. How do you look at that conflict before it happens, and how have you planned on how to deal with conflict once it happens?
Team members have a strong sense of respect for and value of and loyalty to each other. So respecting a sense of loyalty to the team structure. We have two missionaries with another organization who teach with us each summer that we were going to China. And they first came just to visit our program. And they had been leading a team that year in another part of China. And in just a day or two that they had to observe our program, they said, that's it, we're not leading another team again. And they started regaling us with some of the issues that went on with their program. And instead they joined our team and they said, let you worry with the team organization, and became teachers, and among our best actually have helped us develop our curriculum for the program.
Team members agree on methods and activities. Some of this is done ahead of time, some of this is done day to day. But everybody knows what the program is, and everybody's on the same page, doing the same thing in the same way.
There's a division of labor on the team. Not everybody is gifted to do everything. And to understand that there's not a better than or a worse than, but a sharing of those things.
Let me give you an example. The last couple of years that we have been teaching in China, we've been living on 3 floors of an international house on the university campus. Each floor has a kitchen. I soon realized that I needed a kitchen captain for each floor to make sure the refrigerator was stocked and to make sure things were cleaned up, so I just picked 3 ladies on the team. I pick ladies because they tend to be more kitchen friendly. And they were responsible not to do it themselves, but to make sure that their kitchen was ready for the 7 or 10 people that lived on their floor. One of them was a woman that had never served with us before. She was from Australia, but she was just thrilled to be chosen to do something specific that she understood. It didn't take any big training to teach her, okay, this is how the kitchen needs to be taken care of, because there was a supermarket across the street. So even the small jobs, it's good to have that division of labor.
And each team member understands their part and does it. And when you're teaching an intensive English course, such as we were doing, getting them together for a week beforehand, on campus, in the classrooms, actually going through the curriculum, working it out together, laying down the principles. We were training people every year, because always had new people coming in. It made an impression on the university, number one, that we would spend a week just getting ready to teach their 3 classes.
3 weeks of classes.
3 weeks of classes. And then for that whole week, and they would always introduce us as, and they came here and they just worked for a week. They didn't even go around sightseeing. What an impression it left with that university. But then each member knows out of that orientation training what they're to do.
Team members effectively communicate with each other. Most of our teams have been multinational and multi-age. So that takes some work to get them effectively communicating with each other. And as the team leaders, you need to observe when communication is breaking down and see what can be done to fix that.
We actually had a team one year with a girl that turned 19 during the week, or the 3 weeks, and somebody in every decade up to age 80. That was a cross-generational team if I ever saw one.
Team members meet regularly to discuss, report, plan, and pray. Each team has to decide how this happens. Some teams meet daily. Other teams, in our teaching situation, our lunchtime was a team meeting, but it was open to the Chinese administrators walking in and out. So that was not a spiritual time. That was a troubleshooting in the classroom time. So then the spiritual time took place in small groups once a week in the dormitories.
And some teams would have daily devotions, and this depends on the context where you are. It's interesting, some of our Chinese administrators would say, oh, this other team over there, all they do is pray and meet and everything. And they were there to do the same thing we were, but you guys really teach English, you know. Of course we had our, in fact, part of the training before we go is to tell team members that you are primarily responsible for your own spiritual growth and spiritual feeding while we're in China. So we had a weekly meeting of some time to connect and review with people how they were doing.
And team members are flexible. That is probably the biggest thing. Seek mutually acceptable compromises, because it's not all going to go smoothly. So you got to be able to flex.
We had a team from our church in Michigan. We were not part of the leadership or training, but the report came back after the experience. It was a mixed age group, a bunch of young people and older people going to do some construction work on the Spanish Bible Institute near Barcelona, Spain. And One of the guys that was going, who was a master carpenter, believe me, I worked with him. I saw him take a 10-penny nail and go tap, bang, and it was flat against the wood. I mean, one hit drove the entire nail through a 2x4. I thought, man, this guy's good. He says, I don't need that time. I don't want to get to why do I have to do all this training stuff? I know how to hammer a nail. Sorry, you can't go on the trip unless you take the training. What? You really require that? All right. So he did it. I'd never heard that man stand up in front of our congregation and share a testimony. But after their trip, you couldn't shut him up. One of the older women tripped and fell shortly after they got there. Couldn't walk. Couldn't lift a bucket to carry. Couldn't do anything. All she could do was sit. What are you going to do? The training had prepared. She prayed for the team daily. She had them by name. She knew what their needs were all the time. One of the older men became close friends with one of the teenagers. They wouldn't even talk to each other in church before that. And they get back there, and this carpenter gets up and talks about the team unity and the working together, the young people and the old people. It just revolutionized their ministry from that day on within the church.
There are different kind of teams. Most of us are used to a basketball team where you go as a team and everybody works together. And that's the kind of team that probably meets daily and has daily devotions and they're all on the same project. But what if you're a track team? Everyone has their particular part of the job and they're handing off to the next person. That's a very different kind of team, but it's still a team. How about an expedition team? There's lots of unexplored new territory and you don't know exactly what you're getting into. So as you prepare for your short-term experience, decide what kind of team you are and what the project is, and are you a basketball team? Are you a track team? Are you an exploratory team? Or are you a hybrid of some of these? In taking 25 people to teach 16 classes of English, we were a cross between a basketball team and a track team. Because everybody got up in the morning and went to their own classroom. They weren't in the same room together. But there were times when the whole team was together and they were sharing the same curriculum. So there were elements of each.
Often over lunch in those situations. Well, I tried this in this lesson this morning and it worked better doing that instead of this, the way of the curriculum. And another person, oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that because I was struggling with how to make that happen. And you had this interchange of people sharing as a group, but yet they go out and each do their own job in their own classroom.
What goes wrong? Well, lots can go wrong. You've already written what some things go wrong. But here are some specifics of what can go wrong. Absence of trust.
We could probably...
Fear of conflict.
Yeah.
Lack of commitment. Avoidance of accountability. Inattention to results. Now, how do you plan for these so that you can pre-work them? So it's the team leader who has to address the dysfunction. And you need to have good team leaders.
If there's absence of trust, thank you. Be the first one to admit it when you have a weakness or you made a mistake. You know, even with my own children, if I do something wrong, if I go back to them and say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that or I shouldn't have done that. Actually, that builds confidence in the leader. That they're willing to be transparent. But if they have to pretend that they never make a mistake, you don't trust that person very long.
Fear of conflict. Dig for differing opinions and encourage team members to express them. And this is where on a team
stir up trouble, though.
But this is where on a team it helps if you have some sub-leaders, maybe they're small group leaders, or they're the ones that can come to you and say, you know, we're having problems with this person over here, and I think maybe we need to sit down, the three of us together, the sub-leader, the team leader, and this person, and kind of talk this through. But also just to allow in your team meetings that opportunity to express a different opinion, brainstorm, talk about things, raise conflicts, and get them out on the table rather than...
And we, one day, got this little coming back to us. We pretty much guessed where it came from. The person was a Chinese Filipino who was greatly distrusting of mainland communist Chinese. And I was beginning to make good friends with a staff member. He happened to be the head of the Communist Youth League on campus, and just was a vivacious, outgoing, energetic, and thoroughly interesting, and always asking questions. And so since as a leader, I wasn't teaching the classroom, I was often in the faculty room, he'd come by and he would question me about this and that. We had some incredibly good conversations, even down to sharing the nuts and bolts of Christian faith, and just talking like it. And here this rumor came back that he's the spy. He's checking up on us all. So we dealt with that one fairly directly.
In a team meeting, we said, everyone, we're hearing rumors that everyone thinks that Leon is the spy. Well, okay, let's talk about Leon. He is a member of the Communist Party. He can't hold his job unless he is. And he is not a believer, but he's very interested, and he wants to improve his English. Why is he hanging out with the team all the time? Okay, there's the 4 reasons.
And then the other thing is, what do we have to hide that they don't already know? Because we are very transparent about our team. They know we were Christians, but we don't go out there with Bibles thumping on people's heads and preaching on the street corners or handing out literature and Bibles. Part of the training that went on ahead of time. And so there was nothing for him to discover if he was a spy. And just that whole feeling that, well, they're out to get us. And knowing her cultural background and where it came from, we were able to deal with that issue.
Lack of commitment. It helps to listen to everyone's opinion, to push for a decision, and then to write it down, so that everybody knows we have decided this is what we're going to do. Or at least to verbalize it with the whole team so everyone buys in to the commitment that this is the next step. Because sometimes things come up that you didn't know you were going to have to do. They're not in your training, they're not in your preparation, they're not in the list of things you thought you were going to do, but here it is. And it may be culturally appropriate for you to do that, but everybody has to buy in.
You're waiting for me to take that?
I'm waiting for you to take that.
My throat was so dry. Oh, the role of the team leader to address dysfunctions, avoidance of accountability. In team meetings, we regularly check on the progress and goals, confront difficult issues. You have to be, the word I'm looking for, you have to be as wise as a serpent and as harmless as a dove in how you're handling these differences and conflict. Think through who's involved. We had a teacher that absolutely could not teach one year. He had a throat surgery. We interviewed him on the phone and thought, I guess it'll do okay. And had heart like you wouldn't believe, as big as the world.
And had worked with internationals for years.
And actually had a good reference from a former teacher of ours, which we thought, well, she must know. She's worked with him. But when he got there, you couldn't hear his voice in front of the classroom. And we discovered that during the orientation time. And so before we assigned classes, we teamed him up with another teacher who was willing to take him on. He was wonderful dealing one-on-one with students, helping on projects, work projects, interactive kinds of things. But putting him up in front of the classroom to be in charge would never have worked. We would have had complete bedlam in that class. So knowing your goals, recognizing those, recognize that we as team leaders make mistakes even in choosing who's going on this team, and dealing with and not belittling him. He is one of the most faithful follower-uppers on WeChat with his students to this day. And we would have been we would have been a lesser team without him being along if we hadn't taken it.
Last one, inattention to results. If everyone knows what the results are supposed to be, then you can track how they are. We've done something with our teams where we talk to them about how a Chinese person comes to Christ very, very slowly. And this comes from a book called I Once Was Lost. First is learning to trust a Christian, and then getting curious. And there's steps along the way. So we talk about that in our orientation. And then in our debrief, we put signs up across a wall of these different stages. And we ask the teams to think about students in their classes, and were there any that kind of bubbled up to the surface that they know they have moved from trust to curious, or from curious to seeking, or from seeking to asking deep questions. And they take sticky notes and just post them across the back wall. And then everyone can look and say, oh, we planned for this, and this is the result of what we planned for. And that's just having ways for the team to measure their results is very, very powerful for them to step back and say, well, I really didn't have any significant spiritual conversations, but I did get 3 students to move from not even understanding what a Christian was to trusting a Christian. So it's those celebrating those small steps.
One year, when we did that analysis, we had 17 names of people living in the kingdom on the upper end of that scale. And I just met a lady, sorry to embarrass you, I forgot your name. Karen. She was a teammate in Uganda with a couple of missionaries from Send in the Philippines who went to Uganda. And this young man got his first job after college. The night before he left, told us, I'm in the family. He was baptized in the Chinese church out there in Uganda, and followed up by our people who had met him in China. It was just one of those incredible stories of how all these connections from literally around the world came together. And to see the progress of that young man in the 4 or 5 years from our first meeting to being baptized in a Chinese church in Uganda, Africa. Today, he's in a TESOL training program to get certified as an English teacher with our program
Co-workers
that worked with him in China in their program in the Philippines. You just never know how these things can develop.
Sometimes the team leader has to be the one to make the hard decisions, and in times of risk, the team leader has to keep flying the plane. Now, we learned that from a friend who is a pilot. David was dubbing some training videos for this MAF pilot. But when there's a crisis situation, somebody has to be in charge to make sure that things move forward, and then others can do the back work. But if the team leader gets running here, and running there, and running here, and running there. For example, this woman broke her arm. Now, either one of us could have taken her to the medical clinic. But instead, we asked one of the nurses on the team, can you please take her to the medical clinic?
Meanwhile,
so that we could be home and run. We had 25 other people.
Yeah. And I could be making the flight arrangements and doing all the other things that had to be done. We had an unfortunate situation with one of our team leaders who went AWOL one night. And somebody saw him leaving with a briefcase, but he wasn't back at 10 o'clock. He wasn't back at 11. He went to bed, got up. I posted notes in his door, please call me when you get in. No response. 6 a.m. in the morning, still no response. The notes were still in the door. And at that moment, I knew I needed to fly the plane because we had a day of teaching coming up. I don't know what happened to this guy. I do now. The circumstances were very personal and
but everything was
situation.
Okay. It was just
and I called a special team meeting at 7 o'clock. This is how we're going to handle the day. And he walks in at 7 o'clock. Whoa. You didn't put that one in your planning books, did you? But you need leaders who know how to fly the plane when things change.
So all the team members need to know the rules if there's risk. Now, a lot of the things you put back there are the risk issues. One of the big risks in today's teams is social media. Your team needs to know before they ever leave, before they start their team training, what they can post and what they can't post.
Even posting ahead of time
Yeah.
that we're preparing to go to XYZ country.
I'm taking a mission trip to Kazakhstan. Whoa! There's a lot of bad words in there. You don't take mission trips to Kazakhstan. You may take a construction trip, or you may take a project. You're going on a project or something to Kazakhstan, but you're not taking a mission trip. So what words can't they post? Often people on teams will take a picture and post the picture, and they have no idea what it says in the signs. They also haven't thought about how that picture can be traced and the metadata to where it's taken and put the local worker at risk or the local believers at risk. So they need to know what they can post, what they can't post, and what kind of words they can use, and if possible, you need to police them. So when we've had teams, we get them all on Facebook just because that's one way to form a private group and communicate, but we also troll their Facebook pages to see what they're posting and just find out what's going on in social media. That's just one of the dangers. There's lots of other security dangers that you need to know for the place you're going. What are the security dangers to the team, to the long-term worker, to the local believers?
Team also needs to be aware that if there was a tragedy such as an earthquake or something that becomes international news very quickly, and your church back home knows that you are there. We were actually traveling in Croatia, and there was bombing going on around us at the time of Croats getting back at the Serbs who had just beaten up on them, and we heard that the team in California that was planning to come to visit that church was going to cancel because of all the dangers in Croatia at the time. Well, the guy on our team was from that church. He got on the phone, called them in California and said, "You get on over here," and wouldn't you know, the moment he called, or just before, they had just had an earthquake in California. So anywhere in the world you might have dangers, but it get telescoped out of proportion. I mean, yes, we heard bombs going off, but it wasn't where we were, and it wasn't like we were in an insecure situation at that point in time. So you've got to work very closely with your field people, the people who know the circumstances, and don't let your church back home jump to conclusions. The worst thing that could happen is a team member getting on, "Oh, we just had this happen in our team," and call somebody back home. Your team has got to be trained that only the team leader, the designated person, is the one to communicate until everything is under control, and then the information will be given and everything will be taken care of.
So the team goes into lockdown mode when there's a crisis, and no one calls home without the team leader's permission. Because you don't want this guy calling his wife to say, "Well, man, Susie's really sick and they took her to the hospital." And his wife doesn't realize that nobody else knows, so she calls Susie's mother and says, "Did you know Susie was really sick?" Not good. So again, no posting on social media of situations.
And no bypassing and making end runs around the leader's decisions. I don't like what the leader decided, so we're going to go. For example, we had instructions from the administration one year. It was right after the United States agreed with the ruling in The Hague that China should not be blowing up islands and building bases out there in the South China Sea just because it's called the China Sea. And we had Filipinos on our team, and it was created quite a stir in the local community there in Beijing, and the leaders came to us and said, "You have a Filipino on your team?" They had seen the passport, but he doesn't look very Filipino. And yes, we do. And, "Well, you were planning to go to the Great Wall today, and we really don't think you should go." Can you imagine a team member saying, "But I wanted to get to the Great Wall, and I've got to get there, and this is the only opportunity we had to get there," and going around the team leader? Well, you can imagine the danger we could put an entire team in. So those things are very important.
The role of training: if a team is well trained ahead of time, they know how to function when something goes wrong. They trust each other, they know each other's strengths, and they're willing to let the team leader lead.
If the team is not well trained, it's like trying to herd cats. Or as one of our people said, herding earthworms.
So which one do you want to do? Herd cats, or have a team that trouble happens, they go into crisis mode and they know how to deal with the situation? So we have a covenant that we're going to share with you. Consider having the team sign a release of rights covenant that is binding to their performance. We typically have done this during our orientation time because they've signed all these other papers during their application. But this way, we have something in writing that says, you promised that you would not complain about the bed you're sleeping in. You would not grump about the food. You would not do this or that, and here's your name, and here's what you promised. So we're just giving you a sample. This is a release of rights into God's control, and then what will I embrace?
Did anyone get a blank on one side?
This also has a summary of what's going on. So one more piece that we think is absolutely essential to short-term teams is debrief. There should be debrief before you ever leave the situation of where you are doing your team. Because the minute you get on the plane, everyone's mind is somewhere else. So there should be debrief there. But then debrief should continue with the team as an ongoing thing. And like Mags was saying in the video, what's the follow-up plan? What steps are these people taking next? So we'd like to show you another short video. Questions to ask.
Have you or someone you know recently participated in a short-term mission trip? If you have, you've probably had some wonderful experiences, made some new friends, and, we hope, seen God at work. First of all, we want to say, way to go for investing some of your time and energy, maybe your vacation time, or maybe some of your own finances into this adventure. Our purpose today is to pose some questions that will help you realize that investment, the investment that you and others have made into this short-term adventure. So what's next? Well, grab a cup of coffee or your favorite drink and a piece of paper or your journal and sit down to reflect on these three questions. Number one, what did you learn about God during this trip? How did you see Him at work? How did He encourage your heart? How did He meet the expectations that you had for this trip? And how did He leave some of your expectations unmet? How did you see that He was at work before you arrived there? And how do you hope and pray that He continues His work now that you've returned home? The second question is, what did you learn about yourself during this trip? Is there a skill or talent you discovered that you didn't know you had? Is there a character trait that began to emerge when you were under stress? Did you learn about how you relate to other people, either from another culture or right in your own team? Did you learn about what brings your heart joy? In summary, how did you grow through this mission trip? The third question is, what changes in your life right here at home is God asking you to make? Is there something in your day-to-day routine or schedule that needs to be reconsidered or rejigged? Is there a relationship that you need to invest more time and energy into? And do you have any sense of call that God is asking you to serve? And that might mean returning to the mission field, but not necessarily. Is He asking you to step up in your church or in your community to serve in a different way? I want to encourage you to write some of these things down. There's something about the value of jotting it down that helps us process our memories and our feelings. And it also provides us a checkpoint that we can look back as a reminder to sometime in the future. The last thing I want to encourage you to do is share this with someone. Sit down over that cup of coffee and ask someone if you can share how God is using this in your life. This is for encouragement and accountability as God continues to do His work after the short-term mission. What did you learn about God? What did you learn about yourself? And what changes in your life is God asking you to make right here at home?
As we close, let me tell you a quick story. A girl named Becky went on a short-term trip with us 3 summers ago. She is a community health worker, not an English teacher, but she'd taken perspectives and she thought, God could use me to do something. And we said to her, would you be willing to go on an English teaching trip? Because we also can always use health specialists because we have a large team. Sure, I'll go. She turned out to be great in the classroom. She's just a delightful girl, lots of good, solid background in her life. When she came home, she's been working with the teenagers in our church. And one of the things the youth leader, who was a single guy in his mid-30s, Becky was not quite 25, always does when one of his workers has gone on a trip, he took her out for coffee to debrief her. It lasted 3 hours. He found out that this girl not only had had a marvelous trip, but that she had a heart for ministry and that she was all in for what could God do in her life. End of the story. A year later, they were married. They're doing great, too, in youth ministry and in taking short-term teams. And last summer, when they took their first short team together, she said to him, "Now, Phil, there's certain things that we need to plan on this short-term team that you haven't been doing. We need more training at the front. We need accountability. We need a better debrief." You never know what God's going to do with a short-term trip.
We didn't know we were going to be matchmakers when we started this business.
No, we didn't plan that one.
I know that the time is up, and so we need to end, but if there are questions you want, is there something that the whole group needs, or we'll be glad to handle them? Go ahead.
I'll ask the question, you can decide.
All right.
You talked about results and tracking, for example, on the posters and how people are moving through the stages. Is there any provision for tracking with the agency that you're visiting and helping?
That certainly should be part of what those of you who are field people who've had teams, do you have some kind of follow-up tracking to the contacts that those team members have made while they were there and that sort of thing? I know our areas work in different ways, but that is certainly something that would be a valuable asset to the team to know what's happened to them.
I'm thinking of it being as an initiative from SEND to the location, saying, okay, we were there, now what are the results?
Oh, well, yes. Yes. We have accountability to our higher-ups to know exactly what went on and how it was handled. Because in the situation we were in, we were not working with long-term workers. Yeah. But when they're working with long-term workers, we just report to someone above us. Yeah. There are extras of these. If any of you want an extra one, this also has our emails and it has the URLs for those YouTubes. So I'm just going to put them up here. Take what you like. Thank you for being with us. Would you close in prayer, David?
Yeah, let's pray. Thank you, Father, for the group that you brought out here, and pray that what's been shared would be helpful and also encouraging for those who have already done teams and discovered what works and what doesn't work. Make us global servants of yours. To think globally, even our local churches, to be supportive of those who are out on the field, but to be working together as team players, expecting you to do great things as we coordinate and work these teams together. Bless each of those here today. Use this conference as a blessing to them as they go from this place. In Jesus' name, amen. We push the button again to turn it off.